Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my channel. Let me ask you something. Have you ever made love to your spouse, truly vulnerable, truly present, and yet, just moments after, something felt off? Not emotionally, not physically, but spiritually. A shadow in the room, a weight on your chest, a restlessness you couldn't explain. Almost as if a third presence had entered what should have been the most sacred, protected space between just the two of you. Now, I know this might sound strange, even taboo, but stay with me for a moment. Because what we're talking about today isn't just physical intimacy, it's spiritual terrain. And whether we want to admit it or not, there are unseen forces that observe the sacred, that envy it, that want access to it. You see, in many cultures, especially within Islamic and Christian traditions, there's a belief in the existence of Jinn, spiritual entities that live parallel to us, unseen but ever present. But what happens when a Christian couple, bonded by covenant and love, comes together in one of the most sacred acts, sexual union? Is that space truly sealed off from spiritual interference? Or is it exposed? This isn't a fear-mongering conversation. This is about protection, reverence, understanding, because maybe, just maybe, if we knew how to guard our intimacy the same way we guard our hearts, our homes, and our children, we'd experience a kind of love that is not only free from harm, but holy. Let's talk about it. Have you ever noticed how different it feels when you make love out of obligation versus when you do it out of deep connection? When you're just checking a box on the relationship to-do list, it's mechanical. It's predictable. But when your soul meets theirs, when your hands are not just touching skin, but touching stories, wounds, memories, that's where something transcendent begins to stir. That's not just sex. That's spiritual territory. And that's why we need to talk about what really happens when a Christian couple makes love, not just physically, but energetically, emotionally, and yes, spiritually. You see, we live in a culture that loves the idea of love. We celebrate weddings, post curated photos, quote scriptures about unity and becoming one flesh, but rarely do we slow down and ask, what does that oneness really look like behind closed doors? And more importantly, what's trying to disrupt it? As a couples therapist, I've sat with so many Christian couples who say, we love each other, we pray together, but there's something in our intimacy that just doesn't feel safe. It's like we're being watched, or like we fight right after, or I get this weird fear or sadness that comes from nowhere. And you might assume, oh, it's just emotional baggage or maybe unresolved childhood wounds. Sometimes yes, but sometimes it's something else. Something spiritual. So let me ask you, when was the last time you invited God into your bedroom? Not in a religious way, not in a performative, rule-based, keep it pure sense, but in an honest way. Because what we don't understand is that the sexual space is not just physical pleasure, it's a portal, a sacred corridor where vulnerability, trust, and covenant intertwine, but also where spiritual forces, both divine and dark, can be drawn in. Now, if that feels unsettling, it's okay. We're not talking about possession or fear or demonic horror stories. We're talking about atmosphere, energies, presence. Scripture is full of references to spirits, angels, and yes, even demons or unclean spirits that linger, observe, and seek to disrupt. And you don't have to be possessed for something to have influence over you. Sometimes all it takes is access. Let me take you back for a moment to the garden. The first marriage, the first intimacy. Adam and Eve naked and unashamed, and yet even in that perfect space the serpent was close enough to speak. The enemy wasn't in a pit or dungeon, he was near the union, watching, waiting, whispering. Why? Because love is sacred, and sacred things attract both the holy and the profane. That's why the enemy has always tried to distort sex, because it carries power, it creates, it binds, it heals, it reflects God. But here's the part we don't often talk about. When that love is unguarded, when it's disconnected from prayer, when it's entangled with bitterness, pornography, secrecy, or shame, it becomes spiritually vulnerable, even in marriage. And I know that's a heavy thing to consider, that something as beautiful as lovemaking could be touched by something dark. But we need to remember, darkness isn't just evil, it's absence. The absence of light, of prayer, of covering. I once spoke to a woman, a devoted Christian, who said every time she and her husband made love, she felt this deep shame. And she couldn't understand why. They were married, they were faithful, they loved each other. But every time afterwards she felt like she had done something wrong. She started to withhold. He started to wander emotionally. And eventually, they just stopped altogether. What broke them wasn't infidelity. It was silence. A silence that let something dark grow in the corners of their sacred space. Because no one ever taught them that sex, like prayer, like worship, like communion, is a spiritual experience. And like all spiritual things, it can be invaded if it's left unguarded. So now, you might be wondering, does that mean jinn or unclean spirits are lurking around your bedroom? No. But here's the deeper question. Are you guarding your sacred spaces? Are you treating your intimacy with the same reverence you treat the altar? Are you inviting the Holy Spirit into the most vulnerable moments of your life? Or are you assuming that because you're married, everything is automatically protected? Let me be clear, marriage is not a magic spell. It's a covenant, and covenants require tending, covering, prayer. They require a kind of spiritual maturity that sees intimacy not just as a right, but as a responsibility. Because your bedroom is not just a room, it's an altar, and what happens there echoes beyond the walls, into your emotional bond, your children, your sleep, your peace. I know this sounds intense, maybe even uncomfortable, but here's the beauty of it. When you begin to treat your intimacy as holy ground, it becomes impenetrable, not by might, not by control, but by presence, by welcoming God into it, by speaking prayer over your bed, over your bodies, over your unity, not as a formula, but as a way of life. Because when you make love with God in the center, your bedroom becomes a fortress. I want you to think about that. The next time you and your spouse undress, don't just see it as foreplay. See it as sacred preparation. Light a candle, say a blessing, look into each other's eyes with gratitude, rebuke anything that doesn't belong, release the shame, reclaim the holiness of it all. And if you've never done that before, it's okay. You start now, because awareness is the first form of protection. You cannot heal what you don't name. So let's begin to name it. Let's name the silence. Let's name the shame. Let's name the spiritual fog that's been hovering where peace was meant to live. And once it's named, it can be confronted. And once it's confronted, it can be evicted. Because intimacy was never meant to be a war zone. It was meant to be Eden. There's something profoundly healing about being seen, and not just with your eyes, but with your soul. When two people come together in the sanctuary of their bedroom and everything else fades away, the roles, the responsibilities, the noise, that moment becomes a doorway. And what enters through that doorway depends on what you've allowed to live in your atmosphere. You see, many couples think that what they're struggling with in their intimacy is physical or emotional incompatibility. But often, it's neither. It's a spiritual interference that they've never been taught to discern, and so they fight over desire, over frequency, over performance, over distractions, never realizing they're trying to manage a battlefield without even seeing the war. Let me say this as gently as I can. If your intimacy feels like it's being choked by an invisible weight, you are not crazy and you are not alone. There are spiritual dynamics that attach themselves to unspoken pain, to unrepented behavior, to generational wounds, to doors that were opened long before you ever met your spouse. And unless you address those dynamics at the root, you will keep trying to fix the symptoms instead of the source. Now, when we bring up the idea of jinn or unclean spirits, we often imagine something terrifying. But let's strip the Hollywood horror from this and talk plainly. In both Islamic and Christian traditions, these entities are described as unseen beings who exist in a realm parallel to ours. They can influence thoughts, they can whisper suggestions, they can observe, and most importantly, they seek entry points. Entry points. That's where it gets real. Because intimacy is not just physical vulnerability. It's spiritual exposure. It's an open gate. It's where you let down your armor. And if that gate is unguarded, anything that's been lingering, resentment, bitterness, unresolved trauma, even spiritual oppression, can find its way in. That's why the energy of the room matters. That's why what you bring into your bedroom, the music, the conversations, the emotional baggage, it all matters. Because atmospheres are invitations. If you've ever walked into a room after an argument and felt that tension in the air like a fog, you know what I mean. It's not just metaphorical, it's real. Our spirits carry frequencies. And what you allow to linger in your frequency will eventually take residence in your reality. A couple once told me they had the most passionate sex life, but it always ended in tears. Not happy ones. Something felt broken. They didn't know why. She would cry. He would feel shame. And eventually they started avoiding each other. The connection turned cold. They went from lovers to roommates. All because no one ever taught them to spiritually cleanse what they were spiritually carrying. So let's talk about cleansing. Cleansing is not just about casting things out. It's about replacing what was there with what is holy. It's not enough to say, I rebuke this spirit, or I bind that influence. That's important. But what's even more important is, what are you replacing it with? Because a house swept clean but left empty is still vulnerable. If you've ever been sexually active before marriage and never prayed over your past lovers, never broke the soul taste, those echoes can follow you. If you've watched pornography and never repented for the spirits invited through that lens, they can linger. If you've held unforgiveness or shame inside your body, that shame can manifest during moments of closeness. And the worst part, you start believing that distance is normal, but it's not. Distance was never God's design for intimacy. Closeness, spiritual, emotional, and physical was. And closeness is birthed in safety. So how do we create that safety? We start by becoming aware of what we've allowed in. What habits, what patterns, what spiritual openings need to be closed. And once we know that, we can begin to reestablish our spiritual boundaries. Because intimacy without boundaries is like fire without a fireplace. It burns everything in its path. One of the most overlooked spiritual tools is simple heartfelt prayer. I'm not talking about religious ritual. I'm talking about two lovers holding hands before they come together, saying, God, we invite you into this moment. Let our bodies be a place of healing. Let our hearts be open. Let no spirit that is not of you have any place here. that alone can change everything. It's not just about spiritual warfare, it's about spiritual ownership. Your body is not just yours, it's a temple. Your marriage is not just a contract, it's a covenant. Your bed is not just a place of rest, it's a place of resurrection. Resurrection of desire, resurrection of trust, resurrection of holiness. But you cannot resurrect what you've never buried. So if you've been carrying secrets, now is the time to bring them to light. If you've been harboring shame, now is the time to name it. If you've been blaming your spouse for the lack of intimacy, maybe it's time to ask, what have I brought into this space that needs to be released? I remember a man once told me, every time I touch my wife, I feel a coldness, not in her body, but in the room. He had been unfaithful years ago. She had forgiven him, but the air hadn't. Their room hadn't. And every time they made love, it was like that ghost of betrayal stood at the edge of their bed, watching, smirking. So we prayed. We didn't just ask for forgiveness. We commanded that spirit to leave. We declared the bed a place of unity again. And over time, that coldness lifted, not because of technique, but because of truth. And truth is what sets us free. So if you're watching this and you feel the weight of this conversation, don't run from it. Lean into it. There's no shame in awakening. In fact, this might be the first time you're seeing your intimacy not as a chore or a challenge, but as a battleground worth defending. Because once you understand that your love is holy, you'll stop allowing the unholy to have any say in it. And once you see your bedroom as sacred space, you'll start treating it with reverence, with intention, with prayer. Because making love isn't just an act, it's a declaration. And declarations build atmospheres. And atmospheres build legacies. There's a moment just after you've made love, where silence wraps around the two of you like a blanket. It's quiet but not empty. It's charged. And if you've ever truly paid attention, you know exactly what I mean. It's not just your heartbeat slowing down or your breath syncing with theirs. It's your spirits returning to the room. And in that moment, you can feel it. Peace or unease, closeness or distance, warmth or something else. That feeling right there is the evidence of the spiritual residue you've allowed into your intimacy. You see, we often think love lives only in words or in the way we show up for each other with acts of kindness or provision. But love is a vibration, and when two people come together, naked and unguarded, they amplify each other's energy. They merge. And anything that was hiding, any darkness, any shame, any outside influence, doesn't get smaller in that moment. It gets louder. And this is where we begin to understand the real danger of spiritual intrusion during intimacy. Not just because a jinn or spirit might be present in the room, but because their presence might already be living inside the emotional wounds we've never healed, inside the secret addictions, the emotional shutdown, the detachment that masquerades as strength. So what happens when we make love while carrying spiritual interference? The act becomes a vessel for transfer. You give your spouse more than just your body. You give them what's on your spirit. You pour into them the essence of whatever you're holding, whether light or dark. This is why sometimes after lovemaking, one partner suddenly feels drained, confused, heavy, or even depressed, and the other feels nothing. It's not about rejection, it's about transference. One was carrying something they didn't even know they were hosting, and the other, open and vulnerable, received it. This is why spiritual preparation is just as important as emotional preparation. And no one teaches us this. We're taught to save ourselves for marriage, but no one tells us how to cleanse ourselves before intimacy. We're told to be faithful, but not how to be spiritually responsible. We're told to become one flesh, but not how to steward the energy we bring into that oneness. So let me walk you through what it looks like to begin reclaiming that space. First, begin with awareness. That inner check in before you touch your spouse. What are you bringing into the room? Are you stressed? Are you harboring resentment? Have you been watching or consuming something that's unclean, even if just in thought? Are you carrying guilt from past encounters or unspoken struggles? Be honest with yourself. Second, bring it into the light. Pray out loud. Together, you don't need eloquence. You need presence. Something as simple as, God, we lay aside anything that doesn't belong here. We bless this space. We cover each other in your peace. That alone begins to shift the atmosphere. Because darkness thrives in silence and secrecy, but it flees from light. Third, touch with intention. Before passion takes over, pause. Look at each other. Acknowledge the sacredness of the moment. Speak gratitude. You're not just touching a body. You're touching a soul that may be tired, a soul that may be needing reassurance, a soul that longs to be desired, not just sexually, but spiritually. And lastly, listen after, not with your ears, but with your spirit. What you feel in the room once it's over. Are you connected? Are you still holding each other? Or are you rushing into clothes, into phones, into distractions? Because what you do after intimacy speaks louder than what happened during. That afterglow or absence of it tells you everything. It tells you if love really entered the room, or if something else was sitting silently at the edge of the bed, feeding off the vulnerability you thought was yours alone. Now, I know some of this may feel heavy, even scary, But this isn't about fear, it's about freedom. You're not powerless. In fact, you hold more power than you know, because when you begin to treat your sexuality as sacred ground, you begin to recognize that the enemy doesn't fear your marriage license. He fears your awareness. He fears a couple who can sense when the room has shifted, who can feel when something is off and stop everything to pray, who can refuse to make love while angry, not out of punishment, but out of protection, because anger leaves cracks, and those cracks invite whispers. It's not about perfection, it's about intention. There will be moments when you're tired, or frustrated, or emotionally distant. That's human. But what protects your sacred space is not always how perfect your emotions are, but how quickly you invite truth back into the room. I once counseled a man who said, every time we argue and still end up having sex, it feels powerful, but then, the next day, I feel further from her. He was confusing intensity for intimacy. You see, make-up sex can feel electric, but unless it's followed by emotional healing, all it does is mask a wound that's still bleeding. That's how spiritual interference operates. It doesn't need your permission. It just needs your apathy. It needs you to go through the motions without asking questions, to pursue climax without connection, to keep secrets and pretend it's just your burden to bear. But when you begin to dismantle that silence, when you start speaking out loud what you're really feeling, really sensing, you disarm what's been feeding off your disconnection. There is power in a couple who knows how to war together, not just in church, not just in crisis, but in the quiet, in the bedroom, in the softness of sheets and skin and silence. That's where the real battles are won, in the unseen. So don't ignore it. Don't normalize distance. Don't settle for making love that leaves your spirit more empty than full. You were designed for more than that. You were designed for oneness. Real oneness. And that kind of oneness doesn't just feel good. It feels safe. It heals. It restores. It protects. And it echoes heaven. There's something sacred that happens when you begin to view your partner not just as your spouse, but as a soul entrusted to your care. Their body becomes more than familiar flesh. It becomes a temple. A garden, a place where trust must be continually planted, watered, and protected. And in the garden of intimacy, there are seasons, moments of bloom, moments of drought, and sometimes moments where the soil feels contaminated by things you can't quite see, but you can feel. This is where spiritual intrusion becomes more than theory. It becomes personal, because you can sense when something foreign has entered your union. You might not have language for it, but your body knows. You withdraw, or you overcompensate, you numb, or you crave. You stop looking into their eyes. You stop praying together. You stop touching without expectation. Slowly, you become spiritual strangers sleeping under the same roof. But here's the truth. This kind of erosion doesn't happen overnight. It happens when we fail to notice the little things, the subtle shifts in energy, the moments where presence is replaced with distraction, the nights when your body is present, but your spirit has checked out. Those are the cracks. And if left unsealed, something will slip through. I want to tell you a story. A couple I once worked with had been married for years. Faithful, God-fearing, but every time they were intimate, the wife felt something watching, not just paranoia, something real. She would get cold chills. Her body would stiffen. Afterwards, she'd feel guilt, even panic. He thought it was in her head, but she wasn't imagining it. There was a spiritual presence in their home, one that had entered years earlier through a seemingly harmless door, a Ouija board at a college party. She didn't even remember it until we prayed. But that one experience had opened a door that was never closed. And that door gave a Jinn, a dark spiritual force, access to her atmosphere. That may sound sensational, but it's more common than we think. Spiritual realms are not abstract. They are activated through alignment, through agreements, through invitations we don't always know we've given, a book you shouldn't have read, a show that glorified the occult, a meditation practice that subtly shifted you away from the truth of God and into spiritual confusion. These aren't just content, they are contracts, and contracts give permission. This is why discernment matters. Because you don't just protect your bedroom in the moment of intimacy, you protect it in the moments leading up to it. What are you watching before bed? What are you speaking over each other? What memories are you revisiting in silence? Are you harboring comparison, bitterness, emotional secrets? All of these become open windows. And spiritual forces don't need an invitation written in blood. They only need neglect. But don't be afraid. Because once you become aware, you become empowered. Let me speak to the men for a moment. Your role in intimacy is not just to lead physically, but to cover spiritually. Your strength is not in domination, it's in discernment. You are not just a provider, you are a priest. Your bed is your altar. Your words are your incense. When you pray over your wife, when you bless her body, when you speak life instead of demand, you don't just arouse her, you anoint her. And to the women, your intuition is a gift. That feeling in your chest, that sense of something not being right, it's not a weakness, it's spiritual sensitivity. Don't silence it for the sake of peace. Speak it. Invite God into it. Because you were created to be a guardian of atmosphere. You carry a frequency that the spirit realm responds to. When both of you stand in agreement, fully present, fully surrendered, fully guarded, you become a force no darkness can approach. I want you to try something. The next time you're about to be intimate, pause, hold hands, speak this prayer out loud, even if it feels awkward. Holy Spirit, we welcome you into this moment. Cleanse our minds, our hearts, our bodies. Close every door we've opened unknowingly. Remove anything that doesn't belong in this space. Let our union be protected, anointed and covered by you. Let love flow not just from desire, but from devotion. And then listen, feel the shift. Your atmosphere will respond. Because you've just made a declaration that this space, your bedroom, is off limits to anything unholy. And you don't need dramatic deliverance for this to work. You need agreement. Agreement with truth, with God, with each other. That's where the power lies. That's how you restore what's been lost. Because maybe you've felt the coldness. Maybe you've noticed the distance. Maybe your love life feels mechanical, transactional, even burdensome. But the beauty of spiritual intimacy is that it can be rekindled. Not just with better technique, but with deeper truth. And the truth is your marriage bed was always meant to be a sanctuary, a place of refuge, of pleasure, of oneness, but most importantly, a place of divine presence. So if the presence has felt absent lately, it's not too late. You can invite it back right now, tonight, even if you're afraid, even if it's been weeks or months or years. Healing begins with invitation, with surrender, with intention. There's a soft kind of miracle that happens when two people, weary from the world, find home in each other's arms again, when the distractions fade, when the phone is off, the lights are low, and breath becomes prayer. It's not performance. It's not pressure. It's presence. That sacred exchange of eyes meeting, of hands exploring, of hearts unclenching. That's not just foreplay. That's redemption. That's worship. And yes, that is spiritual warfare, won through love. We often think of warfare as loud, as screaming prayers, as oil and casting out. And yes, there's a time for that. But sometimes the most powerful battle cry is two people refusing to let bitterness sleep between them. Two people undressing not just their bodies, but their defenses. Two people saying, we've let too much in, but tonight we reclaim what's ours. Because every act of lovemaking that's covered in prayer becomes a declaration to the unseen. This union is protected. This bed is holy ground. You have no place here. And that declaration ripples. It ripples into the way you hold each other the next morning. It ripples into how you speak to your children, how you handle conflict, how you walk into the world, not disconnected, not divided, but unified. You see, love that is spiritually anchored spills into everything. But love that's spiritually contaminated erodes from the inside out. So what does it really mean when people ask, can Jinn invade the space when a Christian couple makes love? Let's strip the fear away and name the truth. Yes, there are spiritual entities that desire to distort what God created as sacred. Yes, they can observe. Yes, they can whisper. Yes, they look for doors. Unforgiveness, secrecy, trauma, perversion. They hover where holiness is abandoned. But invasion is only possible when we stop guarding the gate. And the gate is intimacy, so we must learn to guard it. Not through fear, but through intimacy itself. Intimacy with God, intimacy with self, intimacy with each other. Because the greatest spiritual protection is not loud prayers you say once in a while. It's the quiet rhythm of a life aligned with truth, where you repent often, speak gently, forgive quickly, love deeply, and make love intentionally. That's how you shut every door. That's how you keep your home clean. That's how you build a marriage bed that is not just passionate, but protected. And I need you to know it's never too late to start. If you're watching this and thinking, but we've already let too much in, hear me now, grace rebuilds faster than darkness can destroy. There is no past too heavy for light to penetrate, no night so long that morning can't break through. If your intimacy has been dry, strained, or spiritually suffocating, let today be the shift. Tonight, light a candle, play worship music instead of noise, pray together. Yes, even if it's awkward, speak gratitude out loud, bless your bed with oil if you want. Anoint it not with ritual, but with love. Not with performance, but presence. Look at your spouse and see them again, not as the person who hurt you, not as the one who's been distant, but as the one you chose, the one you're still choosing, the one God entrusted you with. Touch them like it's holy. Speak to them like they are holy. Because they are. Because you are. Because love, when it's done right, doesn't just arouse, it awakens. It awakens the God within you. It silences the whispers of shame. It commands every unclean spirit to leave, not because you screamed, but because love, real love, is a language darkness cannot understand. And when a Christian couple makes love under the covering of God, that space becomes untouchable, not because of religious perfection, but because of presence, because of unity, because of reverence, and because of truth. So if you've been wondering, can something invade our sacred space? Yes, if you don't guard it. But if you do, then your bedroom becomes a sanctuary, a fortress, a place where angels gather, where healing happens, where brokenness meets restoration, where pleasure meets purpose, and where love is not just made but ministered. Thank you for watching. If this spoke to something deep in your spirit, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Share what resonated, what challenged you, what you're reclaiming. And if this helped you, it will help someone else. So send it to a couple you love. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more soul deep conversations, and most importantly, begin again tonight. With presence, with prayer, with power. Because your love life was never meant to be just physical. It was meant to be spiritual. And when it is, no darkness can stay. Here's to intimacy that heals, intimacy that protects, intimacy that glorifies God. You're not alone, you're not too late, and your love story isn't over. It's just beginning.